London, 1855 *. The Gazette's headline screamed scandal as loudly as black ink permitted. Impoverished Earl's daughter enters peculiar arrangement with frost-hearted Duke of Sheffield. Below it, in slightly smaller type, 6-month contract between Miss Eleanor Balfour and Duke Gabriel Stanwyck raises eyebrows among polite society. Eleanor Balfour clutched the newspaper with trembling hands, her face draining of colour as she read the article for the third time. The facts were laid bare for all of London to devour alongside their morning tea: her father's gambling debts, their family's imminent financial collapse, and the most scandalous detail of all, her agreement to serve as companion to the notoriously cold Duke of Sheffield for precisely 6 months in exchange for the clearing of her family's debts. "They've made it sound positively indecent," she whispered, sinking onto a faded settee in what remained of their once grand drawing room. The Balfour townhouse, like everything else they owned, stood on the precipice of being seized by creditors. Her father, Lord James Balfour, paced before the dying fire, his once proud shoulders now permanently stooped under the weight of his failures. "What choice did we have, Eleanor? The Duke's offer was our salvation." "But they've twisted it so," Eleanor replied, her voice catching. "As if I've sold myself to him. Society will forget. They always do when a fresher scandal emerges." Lord Balfour paused, his weathered face betraying a flicker of shame. "The Duke assures me your position is entirely respectable. You'll be chaperoned by his aunt. This is merely to satisfy his mother's dying wish that he maintain a proper household for 6 months before her anniversary." Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the day 1 week prior when the Duke of Sheffield had called upon their crumbling household. Gabriel Stanwyck had stood in this very room, tall and imposing in his immaculate black coat, regarding her with eyes as grey and unyielding as winter stone. His reputation preceded him. Widowed young, he had retreated into solitude and mathematics, earning him the nickname the Calculating Duke. Society whispered that his heart had frozen upon his wife's death 5 years ago. "Miss Balfour," he had said without preamble, "I require a lady of good breeding to maintain my household for precisely 6 months. You will host the necessary social functions and provide the appearance of a proper ducal residence. In exchange, your father's debts will be settled in full. No greeting. No pleasantries. Just a business arrangement offered with the same emotion one might use to purchase a horse." "And why me, Your Grace?" she had asked, lifting her chin despite her racing heart. "You are well educated, possess no fortune hunters pursuing you due to your family's circumstances, and," he had paused, his cold gaze sweeping over her plain blue dress, "you appear sensible enough not to mistake this arrangement for something it is not." Eleanor had never been called a beauty. At 23, with her ordinary brown hair and unremarkable features, she had long accepted that she would likely become a governess when their money finally ran out. This arrangement, at least, would spare her father the workhouse. "When must I leave?" she asked now, folding the newspaper with deliberate care. "The Duke's carriage arrives tomorrow at noon." Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. "Eleanor, I am so terribly sorry." She rose, smoothing her skirts with practiced composure. "There's nothing to be sorry for, father. 6 months is not so very long, after all." Sheffield House loomed like a magnificent mausoleum against the grey London sky. Eleanor's small valise seemed to shrink further as the footman carried it up the grand marble steps. The Duke himself did not greet her. Instead, a stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Morris led her through cavernous halls adorned with portraits of scowling Stanwicks dating back centuries. "His Grace maintains strict routines," Mrs. Morris explained as they ascended a sweeping staircase. "Breakfast at 7 precisely. He retires to his study until luncheon at 1 o'clock. Dinner is served at 7 in the evening. He rarely entertains and expects silence throughout the house during his working hours." "I see," Eleanor replied, though in truth she understood nothing about this strange arrangement. "And what will my duties entail?" "You are to make the house appear lived in by a proper lady. His Grace's mother, the Dowager Duchess, believed a household without feminine influence would crumble into barbarism. Before her death, she extracted a promise from His Grace to maintain proper standards for at least 6 months after her passing." Mrs. Morris's voice lowered. The anniversary approaches, hence your presence. They reached a set of rooms decorated in soft blue silks, a stark contrast to the dark mahogany and somber colors that dominated the rest of the house. These were prepared for you. Lady Augusta Stanwyck, the Duke's aunt, resides in the East Wing. She will accompany you when propriety demands, though her health keeps her confined most days. Mrs. Morris paused at the door. His Grace wishes to see you in the blue drawing-room at 4 o'clock. Left alone, Eleanor explored her new chambers, a bedchamber, a small sitting room, and a dressing room where her meager belongings looked lost among the empty wardrobes. A soft knock announced the arrival of a young maid assigned to her. "I'm Sally, miss," the girl curtsied. "I've brought hot water, and Mrs. Morris said to tell you there's a package on the bed for you." Eleanor hadn't noticed the large box before. Opening it, she gasped at the contents: 3 new dresses of fine quality, practical yet elegant, along with a note in a sharp, angular hand, * for appearance's sake. The Duchess of Sheffield cannot be seen in mended gowns. * No signature, of course. Eleanor's cheeks burned with humiliation and something else, anger, perhaps. Did he think her so easily bought with a few dresses? At precisely 4 o'clock, Eleanor entered the blue drawing-room with her head held high, wearing one of her own mended gowns. The Duke stood by the window, a tall figure silhouetted against the fading afternoon light. He turned as she entered, his expression betraying a flicker of surprise at her choice of attire. "Miss Balfour," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "I trust your accommodations are satisfactory." "Quite extravagant, Your Grace." "Thank you." Her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "You did not care for the gowns?" It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "I prefer to earn such gifts, Your Grace, rather than receive them as charity." His eyebrow arched slightly. "They were not charity, Miss Balfour, but necessity. Our arrangement requires certain appearances be maintained." "Then perhaps you should have specified a dress allowance in our contract," she countered, immediately regretting her boldness. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost, but not quite, a smile. "I see your father failed to mention your sharp tongue when we negotiated terms." "My father doesn't know me as well as he believes, Your Grace." Gabriel Stanwyck moved to a desk and withdrew a leather portfolio. "Our arrangement, formally documented. You will host 2 dinner parties and 1 small musical evening during your 6-month residence. You will accompany me to 3 essential social functions. You will oversee the household accounts with Mrs. Morris. Beyond that, your time is your own, provided you maintain the appearance of a properly conducted household." Eleanor accepted the document, scanning its contents. "And at the conclusion of these 6 months, you will return to your father with a settlement sufficient to secure modest lodgings and a respectable income for you both. Your reputation, I assure you, will remain intact despite today's unfortunate Gazette article. You've thought of everything, Your Grace." "I always do, Miss Balfour." He turned back toward the window, clearly dismissing her. "Dinner is at 7. I prefer punctuality." As Eleanor reached the door, his voice stopped her. "The dresses, Miss Balfour, are not gifts but tools. Use them or not as you see fit, but understand that society judges harshly those who appear to have fallen on hard times." She left without replying, but the next morning, she wore one of the new dresses to breakfast. 3 weeks passed in mechanical precision. The Duke spent most days locked in his study with mathematical texts and correspondence from the Royal Society. Eleanor explored the massive library, managed the household ledgers, and took tea with Lady Augusta, whose gossip provided her only real human connection in the mausoleum-like mansion. "My nephew wasn't always such a cold fish," Lady Augusta confided one afternoon, her arthritic hands trembling as she held her teacup. "Before Caroline died, he smiled occasionally. Even laughed, though you'd scarcely believe it now." "His wife?" Eleanor asked cautiously. 5 years ago. Childbed fever. The babe died too." Lady Augusta sighed. "After that, he retreated into his numbers and theorems. Says they make sense when nothing else does." Eleanor thought of the Duke's meticulous schedules and precise instructions. Mathematics offers certainty, she murmured. No ambiguity or disappointment. Lady Augusta studied her with shrewd eyes. You understand more than most, my dear. Perhaps that's why he chose you. He chose me because my father owed substantial debts and I was desperate enough to agree to this bizarre arrangement, Eleanor corrected gently. Was all Lady Augusta said, but her knowing smile remained. That evening, unable to sleep, Eleanor wandered into the music room. A magnificent grand piano stood center stage, its polished surface gleaming in the moonlight streaming through tall windows. Unable to resist, she sat on the bench and lifted the cover from the keys. The first notes were tentative, she hadn't played regularly since her mother's death and their subsequent financial decline. But muscle memory returned, and soon Chopin's nocturnes filled the silent house, her emotions finding release in the haunting melodies. So absorbed was she in the music that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway until the final notes faded. You play well. Eleanor startled, her hands flying from the keys. Your Grace. I apologize for the disturbance. The Duke stepped into the room, his face half hidden in shadow. My mother played that very piece. Then I doubly apologize for presuming. No, he interrupted, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. It was unexpectedly pleasant to hear it again. An awkward silence fell between them. My mother taught me, Eleanor finally offered. Before she died. Mine as well. He remained near the doorway, as if uncertain whether to advance or retreat. Good night, Miss Balfour. He was gone before she could respond, leaving Eleanor to wonder at the brief glimpse of humanity she'd witnessed in the calculating Duke. The next morning, an envelope waited beside her breakfast plate. Inside was a key with a note in the Duke's precise handwriting, * the music room is at your disposal. Sound carries well through the east corridor to my study. * Eleanor stared at the key, trying to decipher the message behind the Duke's words. Was he asking her to play? Warning her that he could hear her? She had no idea, but that evening, she returned to the piano and played for an hour, choosing pieces her mother had loved. Each night following, she played, and though the Duke never appeared again, sometimes she sensed his presence beyond the open door. You must assist me with these invitations, Eleanor told the Duke one evening, entering his study without knocking, a liberty she would never have taken a month earlier. The first dinner party is in 2 weeks, and I've no idea who should be included. Gabriel looked up from his papers, a small frown creasing his brow. Surely Lady Augusta is convinced we should invite half the peerage, including 3 eligible daughters she believes would make you excellent duchesses. Eleanor set a stack of blank invitations before him. I require guidance, not matchmaking suggestions from your aunt. Was that amusement in his eyes? Very well. Lady and Lord Hatherton must be included, he chairs the Royal Society committee that oversees my current research. The Pembrokes, as they're our nearest neighbours. The Wilsons, though Mrs. Wilson's conversation is tedious. As he dictated names, Eleanor noticed how his rigid posture relaxed slightly. You actually enjoy society, don't you? Despite your reputation for avoiding it. His pen paused mid-stroke. I enjoy intellectual discourse. I detest mindless social obligations. Yet you've contracted me to fulfill exactly those obligations. She tilted her head, studying him. Curious. My mother believed appearances matter, he said stiffly. This arrangement honors her wishes while allowing me to maintain my preferred solitude. Except you're not entirely solitary anymore, Eleanor pointed out. You've taken dinner with me 3 times this week rather than on a tray in your study. Gabriel's expression closed like a shutter. An inefficiency I should correct. Of course, Eleanor replied, gathering the now completed invitations. Heaven forbid the calculating Duke should waste time on conversation when there are equations waiting. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. The Chopin you played last night, the waltz in A minor. It was particularly well executed. Eleanor turned, surprised. You were listening. Sound carries, he replied, his eyes returning to his papers, dismissing her once again. But that evening, he took dinner in the dining room, asking her quiet questions about her childhood and education. Eleanor answered carefully, then boldly asked about his mathematical work. To her surprise, he explained his current project with animation she'd never witnessed before. You see, these equations predict patterns in natural phenomena. If my theory proves correct, we might better understand everything from weather cycles to astronomical movements. So you seek to make the unpredictable predictable, Eleanor observed. Gabriel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I suppose that's one interpretation. To eliminate uncertainty must be comforting. He studied her face. You understand more than most, Miss Balfour. So your aunt tells me, Eleanor replied with a small smile. Something shifted between them that night, not friendship exactly, but a tentative truce, an acknowledgement of mutual understanding. The dinner party proved less disastrous than Eleanor had feared. The Duke remained stiff but managed polite conversation, while Eleanor charmed their guests with her natural warmth and well-chosen topics. Lady Augusta beamed approval throughout the evening. You've worked miracles, she whispered to Eleanor as the last guests departed. My nephew actually conversed about something besides mathematics tonight. Hardly a miracle, Eleanor demurred. He's perfectly capable of social graces when he chooses to employ them. And he chooses more frequently in your presence, Lady Augusta observed shrewdly before bidding them good night. Left alone in the entrance hall, Eleanor felt suddenly self-conscious under Gabriel's steady gaze. You were magnificent, he said quietly. I've never seen Lady Hatherton so animated. She needed only encouragement to discuss her botanical interests. Eleanor smoothed her skirts, unexpectedly pleased by his approval. Everyone has something they're passionate about. And what are you passionate about, Miss Balfour? Besides piano? The question caught her off guard. Books, I suppose. And learning. I've been devouring your library these past weeks. I've noticed. You leave markers in the pages. Oh. I'm sorry, I shouldn't, no, he interrupted. I find it interesting to see which passages capture your attention. He stepped closer, and Eleanor became acutely aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the clean scent of his shaving soap. You marked a passage in Wordsworth yesterday, he continued, his voice lower. What we have loved, others will love, and we will teach them how. Why that line? Eleanor swallowed. It reminded me of my mother teaching me to play piano. How sharing what we love keeps it alive somehow. Gabriel's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. My mother said something similar about mathematics. She had no aptitude for it herself but encouraged my interest because she saw my passion. She sounds wonderful. She was. He seemed about to say more but checked himself. It's late. I've kept you standing in a drafty hall after an exhausting evening. I don't mind, Eleanor said softly. Their eyes held for a moment that stretched beyond propriety. Good night, Miss Balfour, he finally said, turning abruptly toward his study. Eleanor, she called after him. After 2 months of sharing a household, might we dispense with such formality? At least in private. He paused, his back still to her. Very well. Eleanor. The way he said her name, carefully, as if testing unfamiliar territory, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Good night, Gabriel, she replied, testing his name on her tongue. He didn't respond but inclined his head slightly before disappearing down the corridor, leaving Eleanor with the unsettling realization that the calculating Duke was becoming less of a mathematical abstraction and more of a man with each passing day. The following weeks brought subtle changes to Sheffield House. Gabriel took most meals with Eleanor, their conversations growing less stilted. He worked with the door to his study ajar when she played piano. Twice, they walked together in the garden, discussing books they had both read. Eleanor told herself these changes meant nothing, merely the natural evolution of two people sharing a household. She reminded herself daily of their contract, the temporary nature of their arrangement, the impossibility of anything beyond their current parameters. Yet her heart betrayed her each time he entered a room, each time his stern expression softened into something approaching a smile at her comments, each time their fingers brushed accidentally when passing the salt cellar. "You're falling in love with him," Lady Augusta announced one afternoon as they sorted through music for the upcoming musical evening. Eleanor nearly dropped the sheet music she was holding. "I'm doing no such thing." "My dear, at my age, one recognizes these things. More importantly, he looks at you the way a starving man regards a feast." "Lady Augusta, please. The Duke honors his mother's wishes by maintaining this household. In 3 months, our arrangement concludes, and I return to my father." The older woman snorted indelicately. "Arrangements can be renegotiated, my dear. Contracts amended." "Not this one," Eleanor said firmly, ignoring the painful squeeze in her chest at her own words. "Your nephew has made the terms quite clear." Later that evening, as Eleanor practiced a particularly challenging Beethoven sonata, she sensed Gabriel's presence in the doorway, a frequent occurrence now. "You've mastered that difficult passage," he observed, entering the music room fully rather than hovering at the threshold as had been his habit. "Not mastered," she corrected, "but improved. My mother would say I'm rushing the arpeggios." He came to stand beside the piano. "Would you teach me?" "Teach you?" "A simple piece. My mother tried for years, but I lack patience for anything that didn't yield to precise mathematical formulas." Eleanor moved along the bench, making space for him. "Sit. We'll start with scales." He sat beside her, his leg pressing against hers, their shoulders touching. Eleanor swallowed hard, suddenly aware of his proximity, the warmth radiating from his body. "Place your fingers like this," she demonstrated, taking his right hand and positioning it over the keys. His hands were large but surprisingly elegant, with long fingers that should have been perfect for piano. "Like this?" he asked, his voice oddly uncertain. "Yes, exactly." She guided him through a simple C major scale, his fingers initially stiff but gradually relaxing under her instruction. They progressed to a simple melody, Greensleeves, his brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully picked out the notes. When he stumbled, Eleanor placed her hand over his, guiding his fingers to the correct keys. "Music doesn't submit to force," she explained gently. "You must coax it, not command it." "An alien concept for me," he admitted, a self-deprecating smile softening his features. "Yet you're learning," she encouraged. "Try again." He did, and though the result remained imperfect, improvement was evident. When he completed the simple tune, he turned to her with an expression of such boyish satisfaction that Eleanor's heart twisted painfully. "Well done," she said softly. They sat close, neither moving away, the atmosphere between them charged with unspoken emotions. "My wife hated music," Gabriel said suddenly. "She found it frivolous." Eleanor remained still, sensing the rarity of this personal revelation. "We were married by arrangement," he continued, staring at the keys. "A suitable match. Mutual respect but little affection. When she died, I grieved for her suffering, for our child, but not for lost love. We never had that." "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered. "After, I retreated into mathematics because numbers cannot disappoint. They have no expectations I might fail to meet." His eyes finally met hers. "But these past months, you've made me question my certainties." Eleanor's breath caught. "Gabriel," the library clock chimed 9, breaking the moment. Gabriel stood abruptly, his mask of reserve sliding back into place. "Forgive me. I've kept you from your practice." He left before she could respond, leaving Eleanor to wonder what might have been said had the clock remained silent for just a few moments longer. The musical evening arrived, transforming Sheffield House with candlelight and conversation. Eleanor wore the blue silk gown Gabriel had provided, her hair arranged simply with pearl pins borrowed from Lady Augusta. Several guests performed, an adequate soprano, a passable violinist, a gentleman whose enthusiasm for pianoforte exceeded his talent. Finally, Gabriel announced, "Miss Balfour will conclude our program." Eleanor moved to the piano, her nerves suddenly jangling. She had selected a Chopin nocturne, technically challenging but emotionally expressive. As she began to play, the room faded away until only the music remained. She poured everything she couldn't say into her performance, her growing feelings for Gabriel, her fear of their inevitable separation, her wish for something more than their contractual arrangement. The final notes hung in the air like a question left unanswered. Silence, then enthusiastic applause broke the spell. Lady Hatherton declared it the finest performance she'd heard outside a concert hall. Lord Pembroke requested an encore, which Eleanor politely declined, claiming fatigue. Throughout the remainder of the evening, she was aware of Gabriel watching her, his expression unreadable. When the last guests departed near midnight, Lady Augusta tactfully retired, leaving them alone in the entrance hall for the second time. "You moved them to tears," Gabriel said quietly. Lady Pembroke was quite overcome. "Music often expresses what words cannot," Eleanor replied, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. "What were you expressing tonight, Eleanor?" The directness of his question startled her into looking up. His eyes held an intensity she'd never seen before. She began, then faltered. "It doesn't matter. Our arrangement is temporary, as we both know. And if I wish to renegotiate terms..." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "What terms would you propose?" He stepped closer. "Indefinite rather than fixed duration. Expanded responsibilities. Different titles." "Titles," she whispered. "Duchess, perhaps, rather than companion." Eleanor's breath caught. "Gabriel, if this is from some sense of obligation, it is not obligation that makes me search for you in every room I enter," he interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "It is not duty that keeps me awake at night, listening for your footsteps. And it certainly isn't mathematics that makes my heart race when you smile at me across the dinner table." "You never said anything," she managed. "I've been a coward," he admitted. "Hiding behind contracts and arrangements because I feared what I couldn't quantify or predict, these feelings that defy rational explanation." He reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. "I began with a cold calculation, 6 months of inconvenience to fulfill my mother's wishes. I never calculated that you would thaw the ice around my heart with Chopin nocturnes and challenging conversation." "Lady Augusta says I understand you," Eleanor said softly. "You do. Better than anyone has since my mother." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "Tell me I'm not alone in these feelings, Eleanor." "You're not," she whispered, her voice catching. "But I have nothing to offer you, and no dowry, no connections worth mentioning, only myself. Which is precisely what I want." His hand rose to cup her cheek. "Just you, Eleanor. Nothing more, nothing less." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been before, both familiar and thrillingly new. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her close as her hand slid up to his shoulders. "Marry me," he murmured against her lips. "Not for 6 months, but for a lifetime." "People will talk," she warned, though she couldn't stop smiling. "They'll say I schemed and trapped the calculating Duke." "Let them talk," Gabriel replied, pressing his forehead to hers. "We know the truth, that mathematics failed me entirely when it came to calculating the effect of one shy pianist on a cold Duke's heart." Eleanor laughed softly. "Is that what I am? A mathematical anomaly?" "You're the variable that changed every equation," he answered, kissing her again with growing confidence. "And I've never been so grateful for a miscalculation in my life." London, 1856. The Gazette Society pages reported the wedding with considerably more approval than they had announced the initial arrangement. Duke of Sheffield weds former companion in intimate ceremony. The article noted the bride's accomplished pianoforte performance at their wedding breakfast and the groom's transformation from mathematics-obsessed recluse to attentive husband. Eleanor set aside the paper with a smile as Gabriel entered their private sitting room. "More scandalous reports of our marriage?" he asked, coming to sit beside her on the sofa. "Remarkably complimentary, actually. They've decided our story is romantic rather than scandalous." She leaned against him as his arms circled her shoulders. "Lady Augusta claims full credit for the match, of course." Naturally, Gabriel chuckled, the sound still new enough to delight Eleanor each time she heard it. Though I believe Chopin deserves at least partial recognition. Eleanor turned to face him, her expression suddenly serious. Are you happy, Gabriel? Truly? He considered her question with characteristic thoroughness. I spent years believing happiness was an irrational pursuit, unpredictable, unreliable, and therefore best avoided in favor of certainty. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek. But you taught me that some uncertainties are worth embracing. That music doesn't submit to force but must be coaxed. That hearts, like pianos, require patience and practice. He kissed her softly. So yes, my love. I am happy beyond all mathematical probability. As am I, Eleanor whispered against his lips. Though I still can't quite believe that 6 months of contracted companionship became a lifetime commitment. The best calculations, Gabriel replied with a smile, are those that prove our initial assumptions entirely wrong. As she nestled against her husband's chest, Eleanor silently blessed the desperate arrangement that had brought her to Sheffield House, the piano that had given voice to her heart, and the man who had learned to listen not just with his brilliant mind but with his once frozen heart.